It was a rainy Monday morning in New York City. The streets were slick with puddles reflecting the glow of traffic lights. Yellow cabs passed one after another, their windshield wipers working in a rhythmic dance. Among the drivers, a middle-aged man named Daniel Carter was starting his shift. He wasn't the kind of man to rush through life. Daniel carried himself with quiet dignity despite the struggles that weighed on his shoulders. His taxi was clean, his manners warm, and his heart, though tested by years of hardship, was still open to kindness. Daniel's day began like any other, picking up passengers rushing to work, tourists lost in the city's chaos, and business people buried in phone calls. But as he turned a corner near a small park, he spotted something unusual: an elderly woman standing by the curb without an umbrella. She looked fragile, her thin grey coat clinging to her frame, rain soaking her hair. She clutched a worn-out handbag and a paper grocery bag that seemed almost too heavy for her to carry. Slowing down, Daniel rolled down the window. "Ma'am, would you like a ride?" he called gently. The woman hesitated. "I'm sorry, I can't pay you. I just need to get to St. Mary's Hospital." Something in her voice, a mix of urgency and embarrassment, made Daniel's decision in an instant. "Get in," he said with a smile. "It's on me." She looked surprised, then stepped into the cab slowly. Her name, he soon learned, was Margaret Thompson. She was 82 years old, and she was on her way to visit her son, who had been admitted to the hospital after a heart attack. As they drove, Daniel noticed her hands trembling, not just from the cold, but from worry. "You don't have to do this for me," Margaret said softly. "I want to," Daniel replied. "Sometimes a ride can mean more than just getting somewhere. Besides, I believe kindness always comes back." Meanwhile, across town, Richard Evans, the CEO of a major tech company, was stuck in traffic in the back seat of his sleek black sedan. From his tinted window, he noticed Daniel's taxi slowing down to help the old woman. Richard, a man who had spent years buried in numbers, deals and meetings, rarely noticed small moments like this. But for some reason, this scene caught his attention. He couldn't hear their words, but the way Daniel leaned forward to listen to the old lady, the way he handed her a tissue, told Richard everything. Something stirred inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. When they reached St. Mary's, Margaret thanked Daniel with tears in her eyes. She tried to press a single crumpled dollar bill into his hand, but he closed her fingers around it and shook his head. "Save it," he said. "You might need it more than I do." What Daniel didn't realize was that Richard had quietly instructed his own driver to follow the taxi to the hospital. From the sidewalk, Richard watched as Daniel stepped out in the rain to carry Margaret's grocery bag inside for her before driving away. The next day, Richard couldn't get that moment out of his mind. He had built his empire on ambition and strategy, but here was a man making a difference in someone's life without expecting anything in return. Richard decided he wanted to meet this taxi driver. Through a bit of effort and a generous tip to a city dispatcher, Richard tracked Daniel down. When Daniel received a call asking him to pick up a special client from an upscale office building, he didn't think much of it. But when Richard stepped into the back seat, Daniel instantly recognized him from magazines and news articles. "You're Richard Evans, right?" Daniel asked, surprised. Richard smiled. "And you're the man who gave a free ride to an old lady yesterday? I saw what you did." Daniel shrugged. "It wasn't much." "That's where you're wrong," Richard said. "Kindness is never small." They drove through the city as Richard asked about Daniel's life. He learned Daniel had been a taxi driver for over 20 years, raising 2 children on his own after his wife passed away. His daughter Emily was in college studying nursing, and his son Jack was finishing high school. Every dollar mattered, yet Daniel had given away his time and service without a second thought. By the time the ride was over, Richard had made a decision. He asked Daniel to meet him at his office the following day. Daniel almost refused, unsure why a billionaire CEO would want to see him again, but something told him to say yes. When Daniel arrived, Richard greeted him personally and led him into a conference room. On the table was a folder with Daniel's name on it. Richard slid it toward him. Inside was an offer letter, not for a job but for a full scholarship fund in Emily and Jack's names, covering all their education expenses, plus a check large enough to pay off Daniel's mortgage. Daniel stared at the papers, his throat tight. I can't accept this. I was just doing what anyone should do." "Exactly," Richard replied. "But not everyone does. This world needs more Daniels. Consider this my way of saying thank you and making sure your kindness keeps spreading." Months later, Emily graduated as a nurse without student debt. Jack entered college with his tuition fully covered. Daniel, though still driving his cab part-time, had a lighter heart and a deeper sense of purpose. He never bragged about what happened, but every time he saw someone struggling on the street he remembered that rainy morning. And in a penthouse office overlooking the city, Richard often found himself smiling, knowing that sometimes, the smallest moments, a free ride, a helping hand, can ripple outward and change lives in ways no one could have predicted.